Well, we just heard the UN ambassador, or the U.S. ambassador to the UN, taking a much harder line on Russia over Ukraine. But are she and President Trump on the same page? Let's talk about the U.S.-Russia dynamic under Trump with Vladimir Golstein. He is an associate professor of Slavic studies at Brown University. It seems the UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, taking a harder line during his testimony during the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson saying, quote, Russia today poses a danger, but it is not unpredictable in advancing its own interests. And then you have Trump with his comments. It seems like we have a lot of different voices, no real coherent strategy or single voice coming out on this issue. What is Moscow and Kiev to make of all of this?
Well, situation is complex because situation is not quite clear for the main players within Washington. You know, what is clear is Trump suggests some kind of a revision or rewriting of traditional U.S. policy toward Russia. There is so-called, Washington consensus, which, since more or less the Second World War, persists in seeing Soviet Union and Russia as some kind of a rival and an enemy. And there is, this consensus is so deep that no matter where you go, no matter what kind of people say work for Nikki Haley, U.S. ambassador to UN, they still think that Russia is the main source of all trouble. So Trump obviously wants to rewrite it because, this view of Russia as a source of trouble is not based on anything objective. We see now that this escalation of bombing in eastern Ukraine is basically organized by Kiev regime because, they are bombing eastern Ukraine. It's not like, eastern Ukraine began to attack cities in Ukraine, like in Kiev and Lviv or whatever. It's the same, victims in Donetsk, in Donbass are being bombarded, being, deprived of electricity and everything. So Kiev clearly escalates, but the narrative is so strong that, neither EU nor US Washington consensus is willing to budge. So it remains to be seen what position President Trump will say. Will he persist in his view that Russia is not an enemy and Russia can be a partner, and it's time to reconsider the situation in Ukraine and
let me just interrupt you there, Vladimir. What is the likelihood that that's actually going to happen? I mean, the Diplomat had a piece about a month ago with a headline that said, "Will Trump recognize Russian annexation of Crimea?" Is that likely, given what you described, where there's so much pushback on this?
I think that Trump shouldn't be underestimated. We probably have seen thousands of shows how likely it is that Trump will become a president. Well, he became a president. How likely that he will form something? I suspect that if he persists, he'll succeed. However, he has too many things on his plate. He has to sort of deal with a domestic contention. People are angry about certain policies of his. He has to deal with, imagined enemies. I don't think he's speaking up on Iran, or sometimes China is very correct. So he has a lot on his plate. So there is chances that he might back off, but I wouldn't underestimate it. And for many reasons, it's not only just Trump vision, but I think Trump vision is actually based on a concrete reality. Situation during the last 70 years changed. Russia does not pose a threat, neither to EU countries nor to the world. So I think Trump has reality on his side, as opposed to establishment which like to sort of to stir the trouble. Which we've seen this Washington establishment figures like McCain and Graham coming to Ukraine and stirring trouble, telling them we're behind you, keep on pushing. So that's the situation.
Well, Vladimir, thanks so much for joining us from Brown University. His observations on the situation here in Washington.